Hi, Josh. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Glenn. It's been a while since we've done this.
Has been. This is Glenn Loury at bloggingheads.tv and Brown University, the Glenn Show with Blogging Heads, talking to Josh Cohen, who's a professor at Apple University and formerly a political scientist and political philosopher, teaching at MIT and Stanford. And Josh, it's good to be talking with you.
It's good to be talking with you, Glenn. I just one more credential point, which is that I am a senior fellow at Berkeley. I want to just mention that, so I still have my.
I thought you were going to talk about publishing the Boston Review, which is a very fine magazine on politics and culture.
Right, and we have just I've been editing Boston Review since 1991, and yeah, 26, but who's counting?
It looks like you're counting, and it's okay. You deserve it. Well, congratulations on that. So, Josh, I mean, we had an election. Donald Trump won. He's president-elect of the United States. Everybody is astounded by that. It has induced.
That's bullshit. He didn't win.
We can have a conversation about the Electoral College if you want to have that conversation.
Oh, no, I think that's absurd. I was kidding. I was acting like I had been away from Earth for a few months. And,
So, you're a political scientist and you're an ethicist and a philosopher and a thoughtful observer. I don't know if I should type you as being on the left, but I think of you as a progressive, of American politics. And this guy, I mean, and we could go into his various personal characteristics, but I mean, they've already been reviewed. He's opposed by everybody everywhere and he wins. Now, I just have a few questions. What the heck just happened in American democracy? I mean, is this some kind of, what did Andrew Sullivan said it was an extinction level event? That was his, formulation of what a prospective Trump presidency would be for American democracy. What happened? And what does it mean about the parties? What does it mean about identity, politics? What does it mean about sort of global Trumpism, a kind of nationalist and xenophobia? I mean, I don't know what to say here. But, okay, what happened? What does it mean? And what's next? Because now this guy's going to be forming a government, and there's just a lot of open questions about where we're going in our politics and stuff like that. So I just was hoping that maybe you could reflect on some of that with me.
Yeah. Let me, before getting to what happened, I just want to make a couple of observations that I think it's important to keep in the back of our mind or the front of our mind or someplace in our mind as we talk about the current situation. This year is the first time in human history that fewer than 10% of the world's population lives in extreme poverty. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. I know, yes, but
No. I wouldn't say yes, but I would stop and pause and try to ponder that.
Yeah, I think it's a very big deal. Over the past 10 years, global median income has doubled. If you look at, there's a great website that a guy named Max Roser runs at Oxford called Our World in Data. And it's a very kind of long-term, point of view on education and mortality and morbidity and income levels. And it's very important in keeping the disasters, the extinction level events, and I take that phrase very seriously, of the current moment in American politics, very important in putting those in perspective. There are lots of areas in the world of incredible, striking, powerful, long-term improvement, and it's important to bear those in mind as we um, uh, you know, try to answer your questions.
So let's parse that for a minute if we can. We're talking about globalization, are we?
Yeah.
And we're talking about China and India, not only, but substantially.
Yeah. Very substantially. Not only, but very substantially. And just for the obvious reason, that's where lots of people are.
We're talking about, I just want to stay with it for a minute. What are we talking about? Are we talking about capitalism? Are we talking about global finance and capital flows? Are we talking about billionaires? Are we talking about consumer society? A kind of ethos of acquisitiveness and I don't know what modernization means. It's an air conditioner and a refrigerator in every hamlet. So I don't mean to get too esoteric, but I mean, what are the metrics of human progress here? I grant that this is an important thing, but maybe I want to say at what expense. I could talk about the climate.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of different expenses, and one of which gets us closer to the conversation that we're going to have. And then there are others like climate, for example. I spend a lot of time in China. In fact, I was just there a few days ago. I came back Wednesday night, mostly in Shanghai, but also in some other places. And, you go and, PM 2.5, small particulate matter is running at, 200 parts per million or indices of 200, 300. I've been there in places when it was 400 where you can see the air, you just can't breathe it. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of, a powerful downside there. And also, I don't know if you've ever seen, and this is the one that gets us closer to the topic of the conversation, even closer to the topic of conversation, if you've ever seen the Bronco-Milanovic elephant curve.
I may have seen it, but I don't remember what it means.
I'm sure you have seen it. You may not know it by that label. This is a curve representing global income gains at every decile from the years 1988 to 2008.
I see. And so the poor are getting richer and the rich are getting richer, but the middle class is not getting much richer or maybe even getting poorer.
Yeah, people in the sort of 85th, 90th percentile, which is basically to say sort of middle class in wealthier countries, those are the ones who've been hurt who are actually, it's not just that they didn't gain, who are actually hurt over the period 1988 to 2008. There are, I think, from an abstract human point of view, there have been some great gains from globalism. There have also been some terrible costs, some of which are environmental, and then some of which have to do with the imposition of the costs of globalism, the uncompensated losses, the Hicks-Kaldor gains where the compensation was possible but never got paid, but not real, the kind of thing that Danny Roderick talks a lot about.
I was just thinking about Danny Roderick. I was just thinking about his trilemma. This idea that if you wanted to have nation states, if you wanted to have democracy, and if you wanted to have globalism, you had a problem. You can have any two of those things, but you can't have all three of them. Because if you've got the nation state and democracy, the people hurt by globalism are going to block what you're trying to do.
That's right. The people who are hurt by globalism are going to block what you're trying to do unless you're able to not just talk about, compensation for people who lose their jobs, but actually do something about it. And that's what I think didn't happen in the United States or in lots of other developed countries.
Let me ask you this question, because you think about theories of justice on a daily basis, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So compensation, I want to talk about relationship. I don't want to just talk about the level of resources in people's possession. I want to talk about how they come to have those resources and what the meaning of that process is to people. I want to talk about their dignity.
Yeah.
So the idea that people sipping lattes in Manhattan who are making seven figures by just typing at a keyboard
Mm-hmm.
would
Yeah.
see their way clear to make provisions for the vast flyover country that was marginalized by what they do. Even if they make the provision, the idea that they're seeing their way clear to do it
Yeah.
and putting people in a position where they're not proud.
Yeah.
You know, they're not independent at some level. They're not, they don't feel that they're producing value.
Yeah.
You know, and that seems to me to be inexorable in the process of transformation, that people are going to be displaced. They can't go back to doing the dignified thing that they used to do, that they spent a lifetime learning how to do, that they built their foundation of their lives and their self-respect on. They can't go back to doing that. And I don't care how many vouchers come in the mail, that's not a replacement for that.
Yeah. So when I say compensation, I'm thinking, I'm talking like an economist. I'm not talking about, here's a voucher. What I'm talking about is that as a consequence of public policy,
their main goal,
education, stronger secondary and post-secondary education, training, infrastructure, spending on infrastructure, which is in disastrous shape, as you well know. People have new, maybe different, but new opportunities, and they are not people who are already, in relatively vulnerable situations, not the poorest of the poor, but in vulnerable situations, are not, cast aside. Are not cast aside. And that's in fact what I think has happened. And there are two reasons for it, Glenn. I think two reasons for it. The first is that lots of people in the Democratic Party, including Obama and others, have been saying exactly what I just said, but they're not able to get the policy. They meet resistance at every step of the way on the Republican side. Number one, and number two, and this is getting even closer to the heart of the matter here. There are lots of people in the Democratic Party, central roles in the Democratic Party, who I think just have spend too much time with the people you described before, the people making seven figures, sitting at the keyboard, and who would not get up and say, for example, no fair, we can't get a fair trade deal. Okay, then we're not going to get a trade deal. Okay, period. And it's the combination of those things. And I think the fact of the matter is, for all of her intelligence and I think, decency, arrogance for sure, but intelligence and decency and hard work over, Hillary Clinton is, I think, falls into that second category. I think the criticisms that Bernie Sanders, who I supported in the primaries, made of her fair criticisms. A very smart and I think decent person, unfairly criticized in all sorts of ways, but.
So hold on. There's just so much on the table. I want to try to summarize. So we were talking about globalism and the need for compensation and the fact that it doesn't happen, compensation being understood in the broadest terms. And you were dissecting some of the reasons why it doesn't happen, and you had identified one of them as being that too many people in the Progressive Party, the Democratic Party, had gotten too comfortable with people who were doing very well, like bankers on Wall Street in this environment. And you supported Sanders. I wanted to. That's one thing. I don't know that Sanders could have been elected president of the United States, but I guess we could parse that, democratic socialist, etc. I don't know that his program altogether made sense. Now, this is just Glenn Loury, and we could have an argument about that, although it would be kind of academic. But I wanted to ask a different kind of question. which
You are an academic. What's the matter with its being academic? Sorry. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
what I meant was more pressing policy debates are going to be upon us momentarily.
That are going to be upon us momentarily. Absolutely.
But I wanted to ask a different kind of question, which was, in addition to transnational commerce, which has the effect of displacing people and dislocating them and creates winners and losers and all of that, there's also cultural change. There's cultural dynamism and churning and whatnot, whether it's about gender and sexuality and things of that kind, or whether it's about race, things like that. Not everybody, there's a different kind of structure now of elitism, a different kind of structure of power. The mandarins, as it were, I mean, that's an unkind word, I suppose, but I have in mind people who are defining what is au courant, what is acceptable, what is progressive, what is right. So I'm thinking, I read something somewhere about the politics. It was at Vox. I wish I could remember the detail. You may have seen it, the politics of smugness.
Yeah.
Here's my model of it. I'm an economist, I think, in terms of models. My model is that I've got a distribution of opinion in the population on some issue. Gay marriage, bathrooms, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the kind of center of opinion is moving over time through cultural change and learning, and you could call it getting closer. You know, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice or something like that. Well, at any point in time, there's going to be a left-hand tail of this distribution of people who haven't, as it were, caught up.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's a not uninteresting ethical problem as to what it is that should be our, and by our, I mean progressives, I mean people who are with the tide, posture vis-a-vis those people. On the one hand, we do think we've got our handle on the truth about whether it is gender equality or racial equality or, whatever. We think we know something, and we are aware of a history of injustice. On the other hand, isn't the goal at some level to try to bring people along? Isn't that part of what we're trying to do? What degree of persuasion versus coercion versus cajoling versus moral shaming is the appropriate mix in some ideal arrangement about how it is that you accommodate the heterogeneity of people's opinion about this? Now, let the differences in people's position on the spectrum of enlightened opinion have a geographic dimension to it. Let's suppose that it has a interaction with other dimensions of culture, like religious belief and identity and all of that. Now we get a politics of opinion writers sneering at scores of millions of people as if they were a bunch of idiots and boobs. Okay? And the powerful centers of the production of cultural images, I'm talking about Hollywood, not too far from where you are right now, amongst others, which penetrate globally. And there's this interesting kind of inequality. It's a different kind of inequality than economic inequality. I mean, and I don't want to be misunderstood, the cast of Hamilton chastised the vice president. Like, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not criticizing them. I really am not. I'm just saying, the arrogation, I mean the word literally, taking unto oneself the presumption of, rested upon a certain kind of power, a certain kind of cultural power.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, we don't see that. We're immune to that. We don't understand how people are being pushed around, how they're being. Some guy wants to fly a Confederate flag. Let's get down to cases now. He wants to fly a Confederate flag, not on the State House. That's a different issue. But he wants to fly a Confederate flag. Is that a hate crime? Is it a hate crime to want to fly a Confederate flag in a country where it's perfectly legal and occasionally encountered that you would incinerate an American flag? How can it be a hate crime? I mean, so I don't have an answer. I'm just trying to pose a question here about how do you accommodate the heterogeneity of people's affiliation with whatever normative, consensus in it's a moving target. I mean, I think about my father. Stop. My father is in his 80s.
Yeah.
My son is a gay man.
Yeah.
My father is not with that.
Yeah.
It's breaking my heart.
Yeah.
Okay, if my father could hear me, he doesn't turn on social media, but if he could, I wanted to know. I told him myself.
Yeah.
But that's a conversation that can only go so far. What my son's attitude, and I don't think he would mind me saying so, is it's my life. He's not interested in my life.
Well, either he's not interested in it or he's too interested in it. I mean, it's one of the,
But doesn't he want to know me? Doesn't he want to know who I love and why I love him? Doesn't he want to know me as a person?
Yeah.
He can't get past this in order to know me as a human being.
Yeah.
This kind of idea. And I mean, okay, so there's pathos here. There's real powerful emotion here. But I as I said, I don't have an answer. I'm just trying to frame a question.
Yeah. So I I'll give a very narrow. I'll make a very narrow statement, then I'll make a very broad statement, and then maybe we can find some place to work in between. On the issue about the Confederate flag, is it a hate crime? Well, is it hate speech? I think chances are pretty good that it's hate speech. But I don't believe that you should regulate hate speech. So, lots of places in the world do. Most places in the world do. But I don't believe in regulating hate speech. Now, I'm sure, Glenn, that there are some people who want to fly a Confederate flag because they want to identify with the traditions of the blah, 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 blah. Honestly, I think this is my speculation, and it's a speculation from spending a lot of time looking at things like Confederate flags on social media and looking at who's posting them. I think it's probably hate speech. But as I say, I think hate speech, I don't believe in regulating. I don't believe in regulating hate speech.
I've got it. I mean, I take that point, and that actually makes the other point maybe not so relevant. Is it or is it not hate speech? The problem that I have with it is that it requires you to impute intent. And you just articulated what is an alternative locus of intent, which is some kind of pride and some kind of tradition that you associate with whatever. Yeah. And you do have families that they honor their ancestors who fell in battle underneath that flag as they fought on the losing side, and I would say at the wrong side of a grave national conflict, but it was a civil war. It was a civil war 150 years ago. The South, I mean, think about this voting rights case. Everybody says, yeah. I'm talking about the Shelby County case, which invalidates Section 4B, if I'm not mistaken, of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the one that has a special formula that designates these southern states.
The pre-clearance, the pre-clearance decision. To
which the pre-clearance provisions in Section 5 would apply. There's a prior provision that determines which are the jurisdictions to which the pre-clearance provisions would apply. And it had been that because of the history of racial voting exclusion in the South was presumptively under the pre-clearance provision, and the Supreme Court struck that. And everyone says that it was gutting the Voting Rights Act, and I guess literally it certainly was reducing the power of the Voting Rights Act to have federal supervision of the conduct of elections by local authorities in the South. On the other hand, the idea that the South, by virtue of our history of Jim Crow, would in perpetuity be under this presumption, not applied to other jurisdictions, when in fact we all know that there's plenty of racism and all kinds of nefarious stuff going on in various jurisdictions. Now, why import this history of into our contemporary politics in a kind of statutory and institutionalized way? Go back to Congress and re-argue it and come up with an empirical basis for designating these jurisdictions.
Let me go back, Glenn, to what I was saying about the hate speech issue and hate crimes and hate speech issue. And I didn't mean to be evading your question, and I want to be cautious about imputing intent. And there was a little bit of caution in what I said, and I'm a little concerned that it's been overlooked. I have a very limited range of experience, and let me be clear about that, a very limited range of experience with people posting Confederate flags. The range of experience that I have is mostly experience in social media, which is a really weird environment in which there are lots of efforts to provoke and trigger other people. In that environment, my experience is that most people who are posting Confederate flags are often openly racist. And when I say they're openly racist, I mean racist and proud of it. And there are people who are racist and proud of it, and then there are people who say, "Oh, I'm not a racist, I'm a racial realist." And there are interesting and subtle differences here, but that's what I
got a big problem here. I got a big problem. Let's forget about the flag, but let's stay with the issue about what is hate speech and what isn't. So I think there are too many black criminals. Suppose I think that. Suppose I've looked at the statistics, I picked up my newspaper, and I just say there are too many friggin' black criminals. There are just too many. I'm pissed off about it. I go to YouTube and I see a white guy who had a Trump sticker on his car get beaten by a mob of black kids on the street in Chicago. And it's got 3 million views.
Yeah.
Okay? So now I'm sitting in my bedroom in my pajamas. Yeah. I'm commenting on social media, and I'm mad as hell about black criminals.
Yeah.
Does that make me a racist? Is that hate speech? If I write at length and with passion about how pissed off I am about pointy-headed liberals who have every excuse in the world for why these savages, let me just get right down to the nitty-gritty, are running amok, slaughtering each other and anybody else who gets in the way. And then I trot out some statistics as verification of that.
Yeah.
And let a cop discharge his weapon and it cause some harm to one of them. And then it's a federal case. But meanwhile, day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out, the racial reality is that there are too many black criminals. Okay? Now, how does that make me a racist? Now, moreover, and this is back to my earlier point.
Glenn, I spend more time talking to people who express the views that you're expressing than you do. I'm confident about that. And I can tell you it's what they say after that determines whether I think that they're a racist or not.
Okay, you're saying that there's nobody.
When they say it's when they use the phrase the Dindus. You know what Dindu is?
I have no idea, but it can't be good.
Dindu nothing. So it's when they use terms like that. It's when they talk about racial slavery being a good thing. It's when they talk about this is a white. Okay,
I want to stop you because there's an empirical question here. No. I'm not arguing with you that such people exist. I acknowledge that such people exist.
I'm not talking hypothetically. I'm talking about people who I talk to.
Let me just pose the empirical question. So the empirical question is,
yeah,
what is the correlation between having the opinion that there are too many black criminals, such as I just described, and having this larger worldview that is filled with a kind of racism and contempt for people? Because it seems to me there's no necessary.
I agree with you. Sorry, I was agreeing with you about that. I was answering a different question. I was answering the question, the question I was trying to answer the question you were asking, which is, when do I, personal conversation here, when do I start thinking that somebody is a racist? And the answer is not when they say there are too many black criminals. And part of the reason for that is, I think if somebody says that, I think, that sounds like something Glenn Loury says. I don't think he's a racist. No, I mean, and I'm being, But are you telling me
that if a kid in my undergraduate class that I'm teaching right now on race and inequality in America, let's let him be a white kid, let's let it be a male. Suppose he's an athlete. Suppose he's from a working class town in Akron, Ohio, or someplace like that. He's Catholic. Okay? And he stands up in my classroom during a debate and he says that. You and I both know that he's going to be run out of town on a rail. There'll be an article in the student newspaper the next day. There could even be demonstrations. Josh? You know that that's true. So that's what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the profligate use of this epithet vis-a-vis people who express opinions that are contrary to some consensus, which is back to my model, which I was trying to talk about earlier, the fact that there's a distribution of opinion about how many black criminals there are and so forth and so on. The narrative is supposed to be, yeah, it's true, the statistics about crime, but after all, look at the schools, look at how bad the neighborhoods are, let's think about the causal process, the historical dynamic, and so forth and so on, deindustrialization, blah, blah, blah. And I don't mean to dismiss that. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't anything to it. But just at an existential level, people have feelings. It's not all about logic and data. And the censorship or the kind of policing, and I do think it has something to do, at least in my mind, it has something to do with this election process that we've just gone through. I say, what happened? What does it mean? And what's next? And I think one of the things that happened is that a lot of people saw in Donald Trump a vehicle for expressing a kind of rebellion against being marginalized within the context of a distribution of opinions that is itself moving. There are all these different issues. The border. I try to talk to some of my colleagues. I was out at Casbus at the Stanford Center in Behavioral Sciences about just the question. A person is in the country without authorization. What are our obligations to them? What are our obligations? Is it wrong to want to remove from the population people who are unauthorized admitted to the country?
Well, let me make it a little harder for you, Glenn. Let me tell you about somebody who I spent Friday morning with. He's been in the country for 13 years. He works 50 to 60 hours a week. He pays taxes. He's never been in trouble with the law. He comes from Central America. There are 9 kids in his family. 6 of them are in the country now. He's lived in my house.
Not fair. That's what you're doing to me right now is not fair. I agree with the empathetic implication of what you were just saying about a human life. I don't disagree with it at all.
Not the human life, Glenn. It's a member of the community. Works 50 to 60 hours a week, obeys the law.
So you're providing an answer. I was trying to ask a question. I said, what are our obligations to such a person? I said, or I tried to say, when would it be ethically legitimate to remove them from your community? No one would ever be deported no matter what they did. Deportation as a response to a member of my community breaching the norms of my community, for example. And I don't want to be seeming to argue for something. But
no, Glenn, let me just back up a second because I think I'm playing fair. You said the person is in breach of the law by virtue of being in the country without authorization.
Correct.
Okay, I just described to you someone who is. I'll throw the question back to you. He's been in the country 13 years. He's lived in my house. I know him.
I would not remove him from the...
say what I'm saying now if he wasn't living in my, general neck of the woods, because I'd be putting him in jeopardy maybe, but...
Just a minute. I would not remove this person such as you described from the population. If you're asking me, I would not do that. Okay. But I'm trying to say we have millions upon millions of people without authorization in the country, and the question of what are our obligations to them. Now, for example, the concept of, quote, amnesty, close quote, and I don't mean it pejoratively. I'm just trying to describe something. And the something would be notwithstanding the fact that the person's presence and membership in our community, longstanding membership, productive membership, engaging in intercourse and relationship with us, membership is unauthorized. Notwithstanding that fact, the de facto weight of their presence amongst us and our connections to them warrants that our obligation to them is to respect their presence and to legitimize it and authorize it, so that they don't have to live under the weight of this stigma. And that would be an answer to the question. Yeah. Then the question would be, would that answer apply universally to any person who happened to be resident in the country without authorization? And then the question would be, what would be the criteria? What would be the criteria? And we would be into a discussion about that.
The point of my comment about this case was that you were sweeping too widely with the question, and it was important to draw some distinctions. So I think that there are people who are, by any standard other than the legality of their presence, that is, they came across the border illegally, by any standard other than the legality of their presence, they're members of the society. We work with them every day, we talk to them, we see them, they're friends, part of the they're part of the community. And I think for people in that position, they are entitled to be here. I think it's wrong to remove them.
I want to ask you, what criteria would you? I think you've just, in a way, described some criteria, but you would discriminate then in your endowment of this right to be here amongst those here now without authorization. You discriminate in the disposition of that endowment, bestowing it upon persons who fit within a certain class that could be described, and you gave some descriptors, and withholding it, by implication, from those who didn't fit, for example, lawbreakers or scofflaws or whatever. I mean, that's a question.
I mean, for people who are in the country illegally and have committed felonies, I have less. I don't feel any, compelling reason to think that that it would be wrong to remove them from the country.
Okay, so we've got two ends of the spectrum staked out.
Yeah, we have two ends of the spectrum staked out, and I think there are a very, very large number of people who are closer to the end of the spectrum that I've described, who under the kind of immigration policy that Trump ran on. I don't know where he is today, but the one that he ran on really distinguish him from anybody else on the Republican side, by the way. There would be lots of wrong, lots of injustice, lots of fundamental injustice done by excluding a bunch of people who are entitled to stay.
Okay, I agree with that, although I don't think it matters whether I agree or not, but I do agree with that. But I'm still stimulated by this question of how you find out where and how to draw lines of this kind. Because the very discourse that we're having right now, this very deliberation is a kind of negotiation about the boundaries of national integrity. It's a kind of drawing a border, a metaphorical border now, not a geographical border, but it's drawing a circle around who's inside the polity in a very meaningful way. And
let me just say, I'm sorry to interrupt, Glenn. But
no, it's okay. I didn't have a clear thought.
I just want to jump back to connect the kind of conversation that we're having now with something that you said earlier, which we passed over, but we are in very deep agreement about, and I want to call attention to it, which is there is an incredible lack of humility, lack of a sense of fallibility, what John Stuart Mill called an assumption of infallibility on the side of lots of people who you and I agree with on the substance of the, policy or principle, but who show an incredible level of arrogance, dismissiveness. And I want to be clear about this because the way you put it earlier made me a little uncomfortable, which is, you should have the conversation so you can bring people along. I wouldn't put it that way. You should have the conversation because who the fuck knows? You might learn something from it. I mean, that's what and by the way, I mean, I spend a lot of time, on social media, having kind of halting and complicated conversations with people who I really disagree with. Like the other day was actually on Thanksgiving. I was having conversation with a very, very sharp Dutch guy who described himself as a racial realist. Thinks, diversity is the, diversity is the enemy of,
Let me just be clear. Racial realist means you believe that there are fundamental or biological differences between the races, and some people are inferior, some people are.
Yes, that's right. And he said he used to believe in, the value of diversity, used to be kind of on John Stuart Mill's team. It's good that there should be differences, but, not anymore. And, I mean, I don't want him to have much power over me, but the guy was, he was a very sharp guy, and he was talking about, whites, and he knows a lot about the United States. He was talking about, racial differences in the United States. And I just threw out the remark, what do you know about the history of Italians and Irish in the United States? Well, the fact of the matter is, he knew a bunch about the history of Italians and Irish in the United States. And the thing, it wasn't that I changed my mind as a consequence of the conversation on the substance of the issues, but I sure learned that this was reinforced. I already believed it, but it's reinforced experientially that there are people with whom I disagree about as much as I disagree with anybody, who are well-read, they're sharp, they're thoughtful. It doesn't mean that they are university professors. It doesn't mean that they're the Jared Taylors of the, world, or, for that matter, the Richard Spencers who spend lots of time reading Carl Schmitt and, Nietzsche, whatever. But they're thoughtful. They are, in Gramsci's sense, like everybody's a philosopher. Like they're kind of thoughtful, reflective people who've got real ideas, and they are, people who are really worth having a conversation with. And the fucking arrogance that you were talking about earlier, this dismissiveness, the smugness is intolerable. It's awful. I agree with you about that. And I wanted to come back to that. It's really awful, I think.
So thank you, by the way. I thought you said that very well. And I think it needed to be said. Want to go back to what happened. And so I have a proposition. One of the things that happened was that a almost proverbial nail in the coffin on President Obama, on his legacy, on the significance of his presidency, was driven on November 8th of 2016. I don't want to dwell on this. People get mad at me. I put a few things up on Facebook where I just recounted and, loss of the Congress and of the House in 210 and of the Senate and loss of the presidency and, a failure, worsening of race relations, a kind of, not exactly a stellar record in terms of international stuff. I mean, there are things that could be pointed to, and now you realize that much of it is going to be undone, signature legislation and so forth. And it's just kind of, the historians will sort it out, but it just feels very momentous to me, and I take no pleasure in saying so. But I do think realists, not racial realists, just realists, have to reckon with that.
Yeah. Well, let me just add one more nail to the. I mean, if you look at the state level, at the level of, partisan politics in the states, it's an absolute disaster. I mean, a disaster from the point of view of somebody who has, progressive sensibilities. And this, by the way, and it's this old, dilemma, if you look at policy positions, there are not a lot of enthusiastic support for what Donald Trump stands for, which on many issues, by the way, is indistinguishable from what a bunch of his competitors for the Republican nomination stood for. I mean, on immigration, other than the rhetoric, there wasn't really much difference. On taxes, not much difference. On regulation, not much difference. He's got an infrastructure program, but he don't want to spend any public money on it. What he wants to do is private-public partnerships and fund it through, tax benefits for companies who will then get to, charge tolls for roads or, for your.
I mean, I agree. That's what's been put out there, and it's sketchy. I agree that it's sketchy, but there's going to be a deliberation, and something's going to happen. If a big infrastructure bill comes out of Congress, it's not going to look like that. And
well, look like Sanders' bill either.
No, it's not. I mean, but
well, it's more likely. In any case, I'm sorry.
We lost the train of thought. Go ahead.
Point. The thing I wanted to say was just to emphasize that from the point of view of the strength of the Democratic Party, you could be misled, and this is part of the Obama legacy. You could be misled by the level of weakness at the national level, where the Democratic Party is pretty strong compared to where the Democratic Party is in states. Roughly, 60% or more than 60% are completely Republican dominated. So I think that, it's an odd thing. And I don't mean this as an argument about the Electoral College, but let me just, Clinton will win the popular vote by about 2 million. Of course, Trump has been tweeting, as you probably know, that he would have won that he won the popular vote if you just count the votes of people who are in the country legally. Now, this is
people who are illegal can't vote.
Made up, but
that makes no sense.
Jones,
That's implicitly alleging massive voter fraud, that people who are here illegally are voting.
That's right. No, he's at the same time he's opposing a recount and arguing that there's been massive voter fraud. So whatever. It's the debate on Twitter is whether he's saying this is some Machiavellian strategy to
By the way, that inconsistency goes in both directions. The people who want the recount are basically alleging that there's voter fraud, but when the people who want to change the laws in some state about voting regulations try to change them, they oppose it by saying there is no voter fraud. I'm talking about the progressives.
Yeah, well, it's Jill Stein who raised money for the recount. I don't have the time. Life is too short. In my view, frankly, life is too short to talk about Jill Stein. So I'm not even gonna go there. But yes, I think so you have a situation where Clinton wins the popular vote by not a trivial amount. I mean, a couple of million votes, maybe 1.5%, something like that. Not a trivial amount. Where Obama is at the height. He hasn't been this popular so Obama's really popular, like way more popular than either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. But positives running really strong. So his positives running really strong. Clinton wins the popular vote. A lot of public sentiment running against the stuff that Trump has said that he wants to do, and 2/3 of people who voted thought that Trump was basically agreed with the point that Trump was kind of unfit to be president, but then a bunch of those people voted for him anyway because they were so pissed off, or whether for economic reasons or racial, whatever the reasons were. So all of that adds up to, for me, from the point of view of politics, which means not just ideas but organization, the legacy of the Obama years, and frankly the legacy that led into the Obama years, is a disaster. It's a disaster.
I want to say something about the popular vote, which is, so you have an election and there are rules.
Yeah.
So the election is fought out. people design campaigns, they allocate resources. And the rules are that it's the Electoral College, and so people allocate the resources based upon trying to win, given those rules.
Yeah.
Now, California is obviously a Democratic state. Nobody who's a Republican is going to spend a whole lot of resources trying to win California. But there happen to be an awful lot of people in California. New York is a Democratic state. So same point, same implication. So if I'm running an Electoral College race and I'm allocating my resources and I'm on the wrong side of the most populous states, I don't spend money there. Therefore, I get fewer votes. But it doesn't follow from that I haven't, the relevant hypothetical needs to go back to the point in the decision tree where people are deciding how to allocate their resources and then ask the hypothetical question, if the election had been determined by popular vote, what would have happened? We don't live in that world.
Yeah.
Isn't that a conceptually devastating point to the people who are complaining about the fact that she really won the election, but in fact, it was fixed, it was rigged? It wasn't rigged.
I don't know. That's a complete misrepresentation of people who are emphasizing that she has, won the popular vote. The people who are saying that she won the popular vote are not saying that the election was rigged. I think people who say she won the popular vote are saying she won the popular vote. She got more votes, which is entirely consistent with what you just said. I agree with what you just said. I don't think the vote was rigged, but I think it's relevant. It's relevant that more people. It's relevant.
Of course, how am I going to say it's not relevant? We do live in a democracy.
Yeah, it's relevant that from the point of view of mass opinion, people in California and New York are still, at least as of now, they're still, they haven't done their Brexits yet. California, there is going to be a referendum, but I absolutely agree with what you just said. Now, if you run the hypothetical with a change in the rules, let's say on January 1st, 2016, and then you run the campaign again, the idea that Donald Trump would have done a hell of a lot better in New York and California if he had spent more resources there, I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, I agree with what you said. I don't think it follows that the election is rigged.
He would have had a completely different platform. I don't think we can really. I take your point. Never mind. I'm not going to argue with you about it. He was not going to win California.
I was trying unsuccessfully to agree with you. What I was trying to say is that if you talk about, you were talking about the Obama legacy in terms of the broader political culture and in terms of policy. I was talking about the legacy in terms of politics. The political legacy is, and when I say legacy, is it his doing? Is it whatever? I'm not taking a position on that. Where we are now is that the Democratic Party is not in very good shape. And the place where I look when I want to see is it in good shape or not is I look at the state level. And there is, by the way, the one organization that I know of, national level organization, kind of information that's, is really focused on trying to do something about that is this Sanders 501c4 called Our Revolution, and they're trying to develop a kind of national and local presence in, among other things. It's not a political party, but that'll have a strong electoral presence. They supported 14 candidates in California in the last election. 7 of them won, 7 of them lost. A bunch of Russ Feingold was a prominent candidate supported by them in Wisconsin. He lost. So some of the candidates they supported won, some lost. But I think they're focused, despite all of the criticism of, Sanders for being focused on Sanders, there is this organization, which I think is focused on the right thing, which is building an organization that's both strong nationally and strong in the states, that's thinking about down ballot candidates, and not just down ballot candidates like for Congress, but people who are running for state assembly, state senate, people who are running for city council seats, and then also to develop a sufficiently clear program that you can exercise some kind of programmatic, discipline, if that's the right word, over the people who you're going to support, and there'll be some resources associated. Whether it's going to go anywhere, I think remains an open question. It exists as an organization. You can look it up at Our Revolution. Go online, ourrevolution.org. There are some decent people associated with it, but I think that they're focused on the right thing, which is that when it comes to policy is driven by politics, and politics is driven by organization. And from an organizational point of view, things aren't looking so good, especially at the state level for the Democrats right now.
All right, let's try to close this out. But I want to ask, put something else on the table. It's I say what's next.
Yeah.
For our conversation was what happened. What does it mean? What's next? So we've kind of hit at these things in a haphazard way.
Yeah.
But one of the so let me just give a kind of dramatic illustration. So I picked up the New York Times the other day. I see Charles Blow's column. He's the writer at the op-ed writer at the New York Times. After the meeting where Trump had gone in and sat with Sulzberger and top writers and reporters for the Times. And Charles Blow, who happens to be an African-American man and has been very hard on Trump during the campaign, withering and relentless in his attacks on Trump, refused to go to the meeting. And he writes about it in this column. He says, "No, Mr. Trump, we can't all just get along." That's kind of like the title of the column. Yeah. And he explains himself. I didn't go because I'm not going to, basically normalize. These are my words, but this is what I understood him to be saying. This guy, as president of my country, where he's this pig, where he's this idiot, where he's this buffoon. He says, "I won't be duped by a dope." That's one of the sentences from the article. And so the president-elect comes to the New York Times to talk to the newspaper. And one of their editorialists doesn't come. Okay, I'm not criticizing. I'm just describing what happened. I'm trying to raise a question because hashtag never Trump. That was the Republican people who said Trump would never. So he got the nomination anyway. So they were disgruntled about it. So now he's been elected president. Okay, so there's a kind of. Blow's obviously not a Republican. He's a Democrat, but there's a kind of never Trump. Notwithstanding the fact that he's got enough electoral votes in the Electoral College to be elected president of the United States. And I'm thinking, I get the emotion, I get the anger, I get the grief, I get the fury. The wrong outcome happened in the election. This is what he thinks. But the election happened, and you're a staff writer at the New York Times. A president-elect has come to the newspaper. What am I saying? Normalization.
Yeah.
Granting the lamentable outcome and acknowledging the reality of the guy who's going to be nominating Supreme Court justices, appointing ambassadors, designating members who are going to be the lead staff of the massive federal government, and conducting the affairs of state of the country. In the same way that it was so significant culturally and politically for Barack and Michelle Obama and their children to move into the White House and become these figures of both statutory power, but also symbolic representational power. This is an important event. This guy has been elected. He and his family, Melania, hashtag rape Melania. Was that didn't that trend on Twitter for a while there?
You know why? It trended on Twitter because of all the people who were criticizing it and saying this is trending. It was a horse shit. Don't be taken in by horse shit.
My point is, I want to know where you are on the spectrum of normalization, accommodation, resistance forever. What does it mean in a democracy when you have a deliberation? Doesn't boycotting this guy and referring to him as a buffoon before he's had 1 minute in office show profound disrespect for the people who elected him to be the president of the United States? You talked to me about community just a minute ago. Yeah. You said community meant something. I know that you meant that. Yeah. What does it mean now at this critical juncture?
Yeah. So a few points on this. First of all, on this, and these are going to be a little bit random, but that'll be in the spirit of this conversation. Random is good. So first point is this, Trump is a dope. That is an idiotic thing to say. I am sorry. I don't love Charles Blow, but I like him okay. Underestimating Donald Trump has not worked so well so far. I'm sure you've watched that segment with George Stephanopoulos and Keith Ellison.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and Ellison says, take this guy seriously, and everybody starts laughing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ellison was right. They were wrong. Okay, so first point is this strategy of underestimation has, as I said, it hasn't worked so well so far. And calling him a dope, there are many things that you can say about him. Buffoon, yeah, I think he is a buffoon. I think he's a blowhard. I think he's a narcissist. But dope, no, that's bullshit. And I mean bullshit. You can't be paying attention to what you're saying. Secondly, the unwillingness to accept Trump, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of what Rush Limbaugh said after Obama was elected, which was, I hope he fails. And by the way, when the great statesman Mitt Romney was asked, what do you think of what Rush Limbaugh said? There was a lot of words came out, but he didn't say, I really fundamentally disagree with him. This man is the president of the United States. When police officers in New York turned their back on President Obama, they were, there was a bunch of officers said it was a great act of disrespect to Obama. When Donald Trump ran the birther campaign for years, that was disgusting. I mean, it's just disgusting. And so I think for a lot of people, and I don't know why, but I don't quite count myself as one of them. I think for a lot of people, that's just, you cannot accept it. It's just, it was disgusting. I, by the way, think that, for the guy who wanted to kill the Central Park Five, wanted to have them executed, and then when they were acquitted, doubled down on, I think, my view about Donald Trump is that everything else is commentary. That's the essence. I really believe that's the essence of this guy. And it's a disgusting thing to do. Does that mean I think all that should be said about him is, turning your back on him and saying, fuck you? No, I actually agree very much with a posture that Sanders has taken. Very clear. What he said is, you want to build some big infrastructure projects that create some jobs? I'm right there with you. But I'm never going to be there with you on racism, on excluding people, on violating people's religious liberty. And I guess I think in terms of where we go, the fundamental question, what people need, people who agree broadly with you and me, not that we're on the same side on everything, but broadly with you and me, need to be thinking long term here and not be jumping from pillar to post every time, Donald Trump decides to tweet something. People need to be thinking, what is a progressive, I think, politically left philosophy and politics and strategy? And there are lots of questions, lots of ways of addressing those questions that would be exactly the same whether Donald Trump is the president, as he will be, or if it had been John Kasich or Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio. And I think people should keep their focus on the prize, which is the long term. It's going to be a very rough period. I think it's going to be particularly rough for Muslims, even more than it's going to be rough, although it will be rough for, jocular contempt for women, as Richard Rorty said, will come back. And I think it's going to be rough for lots of African Americans. I think it's going to be rough for lots of Hispanics, but I think the real red meat, the real nasty red meat is going to be around Muslims, both in other countries and in the United States. And I think every time Trump gives a cabinet position to a billionaire, traditional, Republican, a Betsy DeVos, for example, there's going to be some bright red meat thrown to his constituents who didn't want, strong supporters who didn't want a Betsy DeVos. Betsy DeVos was not supporting Trump in the primaries. Jeb Bush likes her. Anyway, she supported John Kasich. So I think the main thing that people need to do is to be thinking long-term philosophy, politics, and strategy, and keeping in mind that whether it's Trump or Kasich or Cruz or Rubio, if a Republican got elected, it would have been alternative to Trump. It would be very tough terrain, but the same problems.
All right, Josh, here's what we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about the issues, really. We didn't talk about whether or not free college is a good idea. We didn't talk about whether the minimum wage should go higher and higher. Is that the way to deal with problems at the low end of the labor market? We didn't talk about charter schools, vouchers, and education choice. We didn't talk about trade and what would be a fair deal and stuff like that. So,
Job, here's a simple point. I think the best policy thing to happen at the national level would be a big infrastructure program and not one built around public-private partnerships. And it goes back to what you said at the beginning, Glenn, and I know we're wrapping up, but I'm bringing it back to the beginning. Something you said very early on when I used the word compensation, and you thought I was talking about sending people some cash or universal basic income check or whatever, and I wasn't. I believe deeply in the value of work, and I think there are lots of ways in which people can have really good jobs. But I think building a strong program of infrastructure renewal would help to do that. And frankly, it would be good for lots of white Americans, including white American men and women. It would be good for lots of Black Americans. It would be good for lots of Hispanic Americans. So that's where I think the key policy focus should be. I don't have high hopes that Trump is going to deliver anything good on that.
So here's where life imitates art. I assume you watch House of Cards, and you know that the president has this program called America Works in this fictional television show where it's about guaranteeing a job to anybody who wants a job. So here's my dream scenario. The Republican House and Senate and the Republican president, with Democratic support, not the way that Obamacare was passed, appropriate $750 billion over 6 years to do infrastructure. And they couple it to everybody who wants a job and is willing to show up at 7 o'clock in the morning and go home at 4 is going to make $20 an hour or more. Y'all come, because we're digging holes and we're filling them up. We're putting up bridges. We're fixing highways. We got, and there's a skill ladder. 5 years down the road, you're going to be a journeyman. We're going to put America back to work. We're going to put $750 billion into it, and we're going to get busy. And it can be, you wanted to rebuild the inner cities? Well, here's what I have to say to all the gangbangers. All you guys who are out there trying to figure out whether or not you want to go get a pistol and rob somebody or you want to do something else. You want $20 an hour? That's $40,000 a year, legit. All you have to do is show up at 7 o'clock in the morning and go home at 4. And I'll teach you something in the meantime, too. I have a dream. How did Martin Luther King say? I have a dream where a kind of pragmatic, transpartisan mobilization takes place. Unfortunately, Donald Trump would get credit for it if something like this happened. He would succeed and not fail in the proverbial lingo. But it's not beyond my imagining that something like that could happen.
I'm with you on the substance of it, Brother Glenn. I'm right there with you. Detail for detail, including getting up at 7, showing up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and you get going before. If you're a betting man, we can make a wager on that, and you're not. I don't think you're going to take. I can probably push the odds up pretty high, and I bet you're not going to take the bet. You know.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to bet my life on that. Josh, thanks for talking to me. It was so much fun.
Oh, good to talk, Glenn. Thanks.